So last week, Daniela, what we did a couple of very basic meditations. So the first one was a practice of just counting our breaths. And so, counting 1 to 10. If you get to 10 without distraction, then start over again. If you get distracted at 2, go back and start over again. And it's just a way of starting to calm the mind and kind of get yourself in neutral. And then the second exercise that we did is something called bare awareness. And we actually did another one, scanning your body, which is, so we did 3. But the bare awareness is where you're setting up a part of your mind essentially as like a watcher or gatekeeper. And then you're just not focusing on any particular thing, putting some awareness on your breath, but not counting them, not necessarily. If it helps to be like inhale, exhale, then you can do that. But instead of counting, really what you're doing is watching your overall mind and just watching what comes without judgment or engagement, if that makes sense. So kind of just noticing my body's not comfortable, noticing, a disruptive thought, maybe labeling, but not going beyond that, not engaging with those and extra thoughts or feelings. And the reason that we do those, and there are 2 skills that really work together. So one is concentration, right? So it's a kind of focus. So the counting the breath, you're actually focusing on an object. So you're trying to keep your mind holding that object exclusively, right? And trying to not have distraction. And if you do, keep bringing your mind back. So that's the concentration part. And then the other part is mindfulness. So that's developing a kind of awareness of how your mind is, the nature of your mind, and then how your mind is working. And those 2 things together inform the reason we do a meditation practice. And it's called a practice. Really, you're practicing for what you're going to do when you get up from that cushion, right? So it's a kind of mind training. So we did those meditations last week, and I was hoping to open it up just to see if anybody, and if you don't have anything that you want to share, no need to do that. But doing those meditations over the course of the last week, did anything come up? Was there any challenges or successes? Did you feel, and maybe you have a regular meditation practice, so you didn't feel the impact, but if there was anything that came up, I would love to kind of open it for you to share. Paula or Susan, anybody? It's okay if you don't.
I think all I would say very simply is that any practice, including the meditation, feeds into quite slowly, but quite visibly into my behavior, in normal life. Mm-hmm. So I'm just that little bit kinder than I would be otherwise. It seems to give me a kind of a slightly finer control later. That's when I see the benefit. That's what I've got.
Susan, anything? Are these particular meditations something that you had done before as a part of your regular meditation, or did you have anything to share?
I have done those before. Breath counting is really, really effective when your mind just starts going all over, bouncing off the walls. And so I like that a lot. It really focuses me right away back to where I want to be. And the watcher one, I tend to get a little more distracted with that one. I tend to drift away into the watcher and attaching stories to the watcher instead of what I'm watching.
Not an uncommon phenomenon. Yeah.
And one thing I get hung up on is I start thinking, as I get distracted over and over, if that happens, I start wondering, if our Buddha nature is clear light, why do we undermine it so much all the time? Our instincts undermine our Buddha nature. We have instincts just for grasping short-term pleasure, whatever, and they undermine our clarity, our physical health, mental health. So, but in general, I have to say that both of those meditation practices are useful to me. They're very helpful.
Yeah. And, we'll talk about that. Actually, that wasn't necessarily the approach that I was going to take, but it's a great sort of segue into, one of the practices that we're going to do today, kind of mind like sky. Because when you say, undermining the nature, I understand what you mean when you say that. I think that's the experience that we have. I think what's happening though is like that nature is there all the time. And it's interesting when you say like being the watcher, like we are neither the watcher nor the thing that's being watched, right? It's like not really attaching to any of those sort of discursive things. Like that the mind is, from a Buddhist perspective, we say the mind is just clear and knowing. And so that doing that meditation where you're just watching those thoughts. And we're going to do two today that are similar, where one is mind like sky and the other is mind like ocean. And the idea there is not to, clouds come through the sky, but they are not the sky. And, the sun is shining just like our own wisdom and awareness. It is ever present. It's just, we sometimes get constricted and smaller, right? We start identifying with the clouds or the discursive thought or even the object of meditation. I was going to ask, so for me doing these two, what I notice, and it's just, and we need both of these things, but concentration is really a narrowing, right? It's like a focusing on something. And then the other is more of a broadening, kind of reminding us then of this bigger thing, mind, right? So when we're focusing on the breath, we're narrowing our attention, we're developing focus and concentration. And then when we're doing a mindfulness meditation, what we're doing is broadening that field, right? And then we're not focusing, and there will come a time in meditation practice where you will be doing both. You will be, maintaining that kind of platform and having that sort of watcher, but then also really focusing on an object. So, I think that, that's sort of the problem with samsara. Like we're not, the things that come up, the things that are happening in our lives, we're not identifying them as just some passing phenomena, right? It's like, it's me, it's my thought. And, one of the things we're also going to do an exercise, and I don't want to get ahead of myself because I have like this outline planned, but, that's always what happens when you have discussion, then it brings up something. But, where does our unhappiness, or our happiness for that matter, where does it come from? Where does it come from? And, I think we have, so if you've been a long practicing Buddhist, then you might, or even a philosophical or a spiritually thinking person, you don't even have to be necessarily a Buddhist. You could say unhappiness and happiness comes from the mind. But then experientially, how are we experiencing that? Is that truly how I experience it, as coming from the mind? And I would say if we experienced it as coming from our mind, it would cease to be suffering. It would cease to be unhappiness, right? So it's sort of the proof that we're not seeing things correctly. The fact that we're having like those mental afflictions. So I'll back up, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But is
So,
that
Bonnie, I have a question. Is that then, I mean, from the time we're born, we're just this mass of instinct. We want this. If we can't have it, we cry.
Yeah.
Everything is about us. And so is it like we have to unlearn all that? Because it's like we're burdened with that state from the time of our birth. I've been trying to figure this out, like, why are we so like destroyers of our own peace of mind by being born the way we are?
so? When you study how karma works, or you think about from a Buddhist perspective, reincarnation, there's this long view, right? And so we have just a snapshot, just a little slice of time is our current experience, right? And it's almost like there's this whole vast universe, which we could, our mind, our own mind stream, our own mind. But what we're doing is collapsing it into this little small entity, this little small moment in time. And so these practices are meant to, one of the things is opening that up and like ceasing to identify with just those small things. It isn't that they aren't there, but when you notice, oh, that's just a cloud. It's just a thing that's passing through. It's just a phenomena that's arising. And why is it arising? So there are profound teachings on why. And, karmically, so, we didn't start with our motivation. So I am going to go back and do that because I meant to do that. And we started doing introductions and talking, and my fault. But one of the ways that karma ripens is as a habit. So it's quite insidious. So we are developing new habits, right? That's what meditation is. So every action of our body, speech, and mind has, ripens in these various ways that keep us in a cycle, right? That's what samsara is, this cycle of suffering. But we have an opportunity to undo that. And I think, and this is, so forgive me, this is, my feeling is that we're in the unraveling. What feels like learning and progressing is really kind of, I don't want to say going back, that implies some linear process, but yeah, becoming acquainted with that Buddha nature and becoming one with that. Ultimately that, and I don't want to get too Buddhist-y, because I think, to whatever degree, I think that meditation, and this class in particular, can be really helpful, and not a dogmatic thing. It is a thing that you can actually test and try. But I would just say, things ripen, we have habits. And so part of this is becoming mindful and sharpening the tool of our mind so that we can actually start to unravel some of that stuff. Literally undoing samsara, putting a spoke essentially in that vicious cycle wheel, right? And breaking all old habits, like identifying. It's like when you're a child, if you really understand the cause. So, and again, I'll rewind. So, Buddha taught the truth of suffering. And you might say, well, that's, how profound is that? But quite profound, because one of the kinds of suffering that he talks about is, well, there's the suffering that's obvious, but then there's the suffering that is pervasive, which is the fact that we're here, the fact that we're in this cycle. And then the other kind of suffering is that thing that we normally call happiness. And the reason that's suffering is because it's an impermanent thing and we misunderstand it, right? So then it develops we develop a grasping and a clinging, and then that habit, if you've ever gotten teachings on the wheel of life, it's rather scientific. It's cause and effect. So then we grasp at something, and then that creates a habit, and then we continue to do that, and then it ripens, or it triggers the very things that we don't like. So, this is an opportunity. These practices are an opportunity to make a change, to actually shift that by shifting our own minds. So, and all of this is related. I mean, I love that. So if I get slightly off topic, then I can just, Dharma's so great, you can bring it right back. But I don't want this to just be me talking. So I want to catch myself doing that. But I want to bring back to motivation, because there's a reason that we're all here. And there's like the nominal reasons, which are all good reasons, want to be a better person, want to be more effective, want to be happier, want to focus, thought it might be interesting. All of those things are valid and good reasons to be here. And then there are often, other things. And we talked about this before, maybe things that sometimes go unvoiced or that we don't feel confident enough to even acknowledge them in ourselves. Like I would really like to eliminate suffering. So for Buddhists, we say that and we make prayers for that, but it's quite, you think about it, that's quite an extraordinary thing, to say a prayer and say, I'd like to eliminate the suffering of not just myself, of all living beings, right? That's pretty lofty. But I think it's important to just kind of take a minute for ourselves before we go into the first meditation, which is going to be redoing what we did last week, just briefly, to just connect with whatever lofty wish or hope, whatever benefit that we think we can create from being here, like ultimately, to kind of just tap into that. And before we start doing a meditation, just in your own mind, connect with that, whatever that is. And then let's remember our posture. So, and Daniela, I think we can give you, Paula, can you share all of the handouts that were shared last week? And if not, I can share those with you, Daniela. But we have some handouts so that you can kind of digest some of this in your own time.
I think
see there's a
Danielle
link
got
for the
them.
handouts on the site.
Oh, perfect. Okay, wonderful. Great. So one of the things we talked about last week was a posture, and I won't go deeply into that, but most important thing I'll say is your spine. So, as we're sitting, maybe imagining, a stack of coins, straight, right? Or sometimes it's helpful, imagine like maybe that you're being kind of pulled from the top and the bottom. So you're straight. And then your legs, ideally lotus posture, but probably no one is doing that. I'm certainly not doing that. So something that's comfortable. You can be sitting in a chair, whatever. What's most important is your back, and then shoulders and arms, kind of make those just not forward. Again, it's related to your spine, just sort of on an even plane. And then your hands, you can rest your right hand on the top of your left hand at your navel if you like, or you can also put your hands on your knees. That's not the classic, but that's if it's comfortable for your body temperature and your body, then you can do that. And then eyes, typically having them closed is helpful initially, but ideally getting to a point where they're maybe slightly open just to keep you from becoming drowsy. But for now, we can probably close them. And then your face relaxed and your lips together, your teeth not clenched, but just relaxed. Tongue on the roof of your mouth. And now we'll just start counting our breath for just a few minutes. So inhale and exhale would be 1. And then see if you can get to 10 and start over. But don't worry if you don't. If you get distracted, you just start again at 1. And just try to keep your mind engaged with your breath only. that place at the tip of your nostril where the air is coming in and out. Put your mind there. And then let's just start and do that for a few minutes. And if your mind wanders, just bring it back to your breath. And now, keeping your mind at that place where your breath is coming in and out, but not going out with your breath and not going in with your breath, just staying there. Now just watch without counting or focusing, just watching your mind. And so if a thought or feeling comes, you notice it, but don't engage it or judge it. Just simply let it come and go. Watch it come and go. And then now we can kind of come back into the room. You can bring your awareness kind of back to the group. So, I don't know if you feel, maybe especially now that we've talked about it a little bit, just that difference between the focusing when we're counting the breath. It's like bringing our attention in and focusing and kind of narrowing in on that. And then the difference in when we're sort of expanding and more like space. I don't know. Could you feel that sort of difference and feel how both of those skills, the mindfulness and the concentration, are related, but very different skills? And
yes, I felt that was a very interesting transition, going from the very focused breathing into the broader state. And my mind was much more distracted in the broader state, yet I was able to identify what kind of things are distracting, ego related, insecurity related, spin-offs, that go into stories and things like that.
And then you can just sort of label that, right? Like you see what is coming up, but then you just can watch it pass. And, when we're not doing a practice like this, then we're just sort of, walking through our daily life. The same thing happens, right? The distractions, what we say, mental afflictions, whatever, come up. And typically, the habit is to just engage with them, to sort of become them. And it's really helpful, I think, to see just the geniusness of Buddhist meditation, just seeing them, that they're not, that first of all, that we have a choice. And I guess, that's a question. So I just made an assertion, but do you have that sense that there's some kind of choice about, are you starting to feel that there is a choice in what we engage in? What thoughts we kind of link onto and go with, right? And that's the skill that we're developing is watching, seeing what's coming up, and then seeing that they do go on their own. They sort of arise on their own accord, and if we don't go with them, if we don't sort of feed them, then they dissipate. Right? They don't.
I think that's a really good way to explain it. That made it very clear for me. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's our choice. We have a choice, and we're training our mind to make the right choice. That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the reason that we're here, right? Like if we say the mind is clear and knowing, well, why am I not clear? Because I'm labeling myself and I'm associating with the clouds or the discursive thoughts. I'm riding those waves, and I'm saying waves, because one of the next meditations we'll do is, there's two of them, and they're very similar, and it's the same sort of a mindfulness thing. Is envisioning, seeing the mind as like sky, this bright, expansive, clear, luminous thing. And as I said earlier, the sun shines always, and there may be clouds that are obscuring it from our vision, but that doesn't mean the sun's not constantly shining, right? So our mind, you said earlier, Susan, why do we work sort of against ourselves? That part of ourselves, our Buddha nature, our mind is always there, and its nature is always that, right? And it's just, we can be obscured. We get obscured. The clouds. allow them to take our attention, right? Out of habit, just out of habit. And so meditation creates that space, that opportunity to change the patterns and develop new patterns. I was going to actually do the mind like sky meditation before this, but it might be helpful to have a little discussion. Let's talk about a negative situation. It can be something real, something hypothetical. Think of some problem that I don't know. If somebody wants, let's get creative together. Let's kind of examine this idea of what we can do with meditation practice. Anybody have a negative situation that real or hypothetical?
I have a question first.
Oh, please.
Or perhaps, yeah, or maybe just a tip or advice. I am sitting on the floor, and so many of my distractions were, it was like painful to be sitting in the same position for so long.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what to do about that.
So later on, actually, in this course, there's all kinds of like tips on what to do, the antidote for different kinds of distractions. Pain is super common. We're always on a walking a line, right, between what is. So sometimes you're in pain, and it might be helpful to just notice pain. And pain, maybe another thought pops up. Because of the pain, something else comes up, and just kind of noticing those and letting them go. Sometimes, though, it can be such a distraction that it's not productive anymore, and you're not meditating, right? You're sitting there punishing yourself, right? So, I think balance, right? Middle way applies in so many different ways. And I would say in this one, sometimes it is better to adjust your body, move your posture. But it might be interesting to play with that, and sometimes maybe not move it, and see if the pain goes away. See if sometimes it is just a distraction and it goes away. But either way, it's getting to know your mind, but don't let it take over, right? Another thing is people will get really sleepy, and you're doing a meditation practice. Sometimes you have to get up and you have to stop the practice, splash some water on your face, go for a walk, come back to it. It's like saying lotus position is the ideal position, but it can be a distraction. And so, we're not going to spend our time trying to tie our body in a knot, but it's what you're experiencing is pervasive. It's more than just common. I think everyone has had that kind of thing, or you choose to sit in the wrong place, or, okay, I'm not going to do lotus. I'm going to sit sort of just cross-legged, and I've put my ankle in a way that isn't comfortable, or, the floor. You play with your position, play with where you're sitting, and find what works for you. That's actually going to be something that you're going to want to do and be able to do. So that was a lot of blah, blah, but hopefully that answers a little bit. And I don't know if anyone else has anything that they want to offer.
Bonnie, as you know, I'm like this naughty schoolgirl at the back of the class, So when I sit, I'm on like a folded duvet, really thick, and this thing here is another super thick thingy. So I do not, I have enough problems. What I don't need, seriously, is like pain in my bum right now, So that's how I do it.
That's good. That's good. We're not looking to cultivate suffering. We're looking to end it. But sometimes that middle way might be. It's like saying, am I doing enough? Am I doing enough? And I think a lot of us have that. I'm not doing enough. I'm not progressing enough. I'm not offering enough. I'm not giving. But what can you do happily? You know, Master Shantideva, a Buddhist classic, Guide to Bodhisattva's Way of Life. He's like, you want to practice generosity, you know, start with carrots and potatoes. Start with little things that you can give happily. You know, sometimes we get so inspired and so enthusiastic and we want to make a big grand gesture. But, you know, as a very dear Dharma friend once told me, it's not a relay, it's a marathon. Right? So we're playing a long game. So being kind to yourself is so important. It's so important. And then if you're not kind to yourself, you can't really be kind to anyone else. When we're rigid and harsh with ourselves, you know, that mind, that's our mind. That's how we are. We're creating those habits with ourselves, and they sneak out and they manifest in other ways too, you know. So Lama Yeshe, and I can't think of the exact quote now, and which is shameful. I used to have it right on my desk, but it was like, you know, first be kind to yourself, then all sentient beings, because you can't really do the second. If you can't even be kind to the one that you know so intimately, right? All the ways that she tries and all her failures and disappointments, and you know everything. And if you can't be kind to this one, you know, then who can you be kind with? So that's about pain. But it's interesting.
After
So
Paula's note, I'm gonna transition to the couch.
do that. Please do that. So does anyone have, and you know, it's sometimes really great if it's something that's happening in your life that you might want to share, but if not, let's, I mean, I'm happy to come up with one, but I don't want to hear my own voice droning on and on. Anybody have an example of just a negative situation, and how you would ordinarily react to it, or how you would be feeling or thinking about something? I don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Does Suzanne want to say something? Otherwise, I'll jump in again.
No, go ahead, Paula.
Not a specific thing, but just, I'm using a heavy duty word, but trauma, you know, just kind of ongoing trauma. And so as I said last week, you know, kind of half decent meditation with good focus is kind of out the window. But what I can do, what I can achieve easily, is these days I can sit still. After years of hurt bum, I can sit still and comfortable with all this gear. So that's number one. Number two, if I just sit like we did as you directed us, I'm not able to do the stuff, but you can feel very clearly a settling. Everything settles, and the trauma is pretty much out the picture for a while. So, you know, I mean, that's invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not looking for samadhi at this point, you know, just that's good enough. That's
Well,
it.
and I don't know about you, but when I come out of meditation, there is things look different, or like the energy in the room, and this is like a virtual room, but the energy in the room changed for me. So, you know, if it didn't change for you, I invite you to like check and see if that happens, you know, after you've sat doing any of these kinds of exercises. When you stop, just pause and look at how you're seeing the world in that moment. And is it different from before you started the meditation? It's been my experience that without exception, it's different. Sometimes I have a great meditation and it's very different. Other times it's a little different, but it's always something different. You know, I wanted to kind of talk about, and I was hoping, but somebody might have like a real sort of problem that they have, but we could take a hypothetical situation. Like imagine that, I don't know, that you've lost your job. I mean, and there's a lot of other traumas. I mean, there's lifelong, well, you know what, let's go with, because you brought up trauma. And I think a lot of people have sort of various kinds of childhood trauma, things that feel like they were intentionally delivered to you, or things that were just incidentally or accidentally or whatever that happen to people when they're growing up. So what is an ordinary way of responding? So say something triggers you, you're in a household with a very angry person. You know, I know so many people who grew up in households particularly where there's, alcoholism or things like that, where there can be explosive situations,
Fight,
anger.
flight, or freeze.
Pardon?
Fight, flight, or freeze.
Yeah. Just those. Yeah. And it's a way of protecting, right? So how does that then, as we get older, we encounter a situation that feels similar to that, and it's the same kind of response, right? And there's nothing,
or maybe even escalated, right?
Yeah.
Avoidance, bigger fights, running from situations.
And then how we feel and think about ourselves, and how we think and feel about those other people, right? It can affect our self-worth. So are there things we can do to actually shift or change? So that's a real problem. And it can affect all of your relationships. It can affect your relationship with yourself. So is it possible to take something negative that has harmed us and transform that, change that, and use that essentially as something that can help us to become better, stronger people? I mean, and then if we do that, what does that say about the suffering? And so going back to, like, if we say suffering comes from our mind, which is, a Buddhist thought, that's the assertion. But we have to check all these things out, that our suffering comes from our mind. But then you look and say, well, there's a child, and a child endured some of these very negative things. So that suffering, that didn't come from their mind. Or did it? How did it? And then the adult, how can that adult change or shift those things? Is it possible, do you think?
I think it's possible, but it also depends on the severity of the incident that happened. For instance, if a child was in a classroom shooting, I actually don't know how they would ever get over it. But I think they would have to try. Adults would have to help that child really intervene.
Absolutely. Well, you picked that's a really severe example.
Yeah, well, I'm a classroom teacher, and that really bothers me. Even though I've never been in that, I've been in lockdown, but not in that. And I feel traumatized just because it is in the news, not ever having gone through it. I feel, and so those who have actually gone through it are extremely traumatized, and their families, has a ripple effect.
Very true.
So
And that's a very real example that I think all of us can relate to, right? I mean, knowing about it is traumatizing, right?
Yeah, just knowing it, people would do that.
So how can we work with something like that? How can we take something like that? Can we, and change it? So Lama Zopa Rinpoche, there's a book. It's a bunch of his teachings that were compiled and put into a book. It's Transforming Problems into Happiness. Actually, Venerable Rabina is very good with this one too. So taking something that is it looks objectively just horrible, and it is, but what can we do? How can we use those things to change our mind? Like, how can we? So if I think about something horrific, like, oh, please.
I have a question. Are you thinking about changing our mind if we were the person directly experiencing that, like as the child experiencing a shooting? Or are you saying we as people here, how can we make the world a better place for reasons like this? Do you know what I'm saying? Are we saying it as like an observer or as somebody who was in that?
Actually, both, right? Okay. So if the methods work, right? So a child isn't in that point to be able to do the kind of thought transformation and mind training that we're talking about trying to do. So that's, I mean, we can't do that. But that child growing up then has this thing that's happened to them. And so then how can we take something essentially that's poison, that's something poison, and can we change that thing? So, I mean, so it's, again, children don't have the means to do something like this. So we can either look at it as us observing, or if we were a child who encountered something like that, then thinking of that suffering. What did that suffering show us? Because there's all of these different clouds that come. There's all of these thoughts that come. And you see sometimes people who have been terribly harmed or victimized. And it's not that one person is right or wrong or better or worse, but it's about what's more productive, right? Someone who is focused on the victimhood, or someone who's focused on being a survivor. And they're the same person, and it's the same situation, but it's a different kind of mind. And so it's not about putting a judgment on anyone for how they experience trauma. The purpose of talking about it is to just say, is it possible to change it, right? The same thing can happen to two people, and they will experience it very, very differently, right? And then how they come out of it, how they use that. Like, is it possible that they could be stronger, more compassionate? And then I think, and maybe it's unfortunate that we're going with a very extreme example, but then I think we have to say, well, if so much, if we're able to use that for so much good, then have we changed that? Have we changed it in ourselves from suffering into something else? Have we transformed it into something else? Compassion, awareness, all of those good qualities that we want to cultivate. I'm going to stop because it's heavy. Maybe too heavy for Meditation 101.
Well, it brings me back to, this is why I want to do the things I want to do. I want to work with children art therapy. This is why I'm on this path. When I was at the shelter, we had a research analyst, and through her many years of research, discovered that children who've experienced domestic violence in the home 800% more likely to become an abuser themselves, which is an incredible statistic. But we also found out that the number one form of resiliency or breaking the cycle is having at least one supportive adult in their life, supportive, trusted adult. And so it was like my greatest joy, even though my background is in arts, I'm studying art therapy, my greatest joy was building connections with the children and the families, and that carried even longer. Some of them have reached out to me since I've left and other things, and some, I'll never know what happens, but I think it just reinforces that message for me is like we can do the work that we can do to hopefully break some of those systems or support in a positive way the individuals who need it. I don't know if that's maybe too simplified for what you're going for, but for me it reinforces the messaging of why I want to work with children, because I can help them feel more comfortable on a path that might be in a healthier light.
It's not too simplistic. I think you hit the nail on the head. When I was talking about motivation, lofty motivations, Buddha saw suffering, like all the suffering in the world, and wanted to get out of that and wanted to help others. And in the end, so Buddha became enlightened and ceased his own suffering. And then the first thing he did was want to share that and teach, because that is how we can help. I mean, that's exactly, it's like Dharma is like, there's often the analogy of like the doctor, right? The doctor is the Buddha, and the nurse is the Sangha, and the medicine is the Dharma. It's the teachings. That's what we can actually do for others. So, I mean, it's a perfect analogy. So we're not helpless. And maybe that's another thing. There's a feeling of helplessness, and that's a kind of trauma, I think. I think that's a really negative, and then we can start to feel helpless and then become discouraged. And, there's a cycle, like so many things. And the cycle can, the noose can get tighter and the cycle can spiral down, or we can shift that and start to make that kind of change.
Well, and I was in this conversation recently too that you reminded me of. Sorry, I will stop going on soon, but thinking of the helplessness is, you think about how many cars or people, pedestrians walk by an accident, how many of those people actually call in the accident, right? Because they're like, a terrible accident, but someone else is going to get it. Someone else is calling it in, but you think about how many people pass it before someone actually calls it.
Yeah. Taking responsibility. I mean, it's very interesting, right? Because
why not can all of us feel like, oh my gosh, a terrible accident, I should do something about this. I have, maybe I'm not a surgeon or a doctor or nurse, but I can take my responsibility of what I am capable of doing.
I'm sort of laughing because this is what a bodhisattva, this is what an aspiring, what we call a bodhisattva does, recognize I'm not capable. I don't know how to help. So I need to learn these methods. I need to learn myself. I need to train myself. So then I can show someone else. Then I can help someone else. Mm-hmm. Right. And then you get a little bit of confidence when I think the lovely thing about Buddhist practice and meditation practice is it's very experiential. So you don't have to take someone's word, here's a method for you, and, pay us X amount of dollars and, take these pills or do this weird thing. It's something very simple and straightforward that we can all do. And then we can test and see the results for ourselves. And to your point, then we can take responsibility to help others, to do that in whatever way, whether it's, calling an ambulance or whether it's, all things.
Right.
Suzanne, I'm sorry. I keep calling you Suzanne because I have a friend who spells her name like that. Susan.
No, that's fine. I like Suzanne.
You unmuted, so I wanted to see. And I see Sergio in the room. I don't know if you're just observing, but you're welcome.
I just wanted to say, I think Daniela's art therapy is awesome. It's really awesome therapy. It's very powerful, I think. It can be. because it reaches a person not only, I mean, visually, emotionally, on so many levels, deep into your mind. It's great. I'm glad to hear you doing that. Just wanted to say that.
Thank you so much.
Music therapy too is great. I'm really impressed by how powerful that can be too, to heal trauma.
So that's a heavy conversation.
Can I say something, Monique? There's something very strange about suffering and how it, when suffering is informed with Dharma knowledge, then I think there's two particular things that come out that are good. If it's not informed with Dharma knowledge, or a person doesn't have that kind of nature character, it can take a person down. It can destroy a person, or it can make them vicious, that kind of thing. But what is strange is that it seems to be a requirement for strong development. It seems that there is a strong link between, the quality, the strength of one's bodhisattva talents and the suffering that a person has endured directly or indirectly. So it's weird, but that appears to be how it works.
So are you saying that the more someone has experienced suffering, that they have a better, I guess, backbone or a more experience behind them to deal with it?
Yeah, Sergio, I live in Japan, and this is a place where people kind of live in their own micro bubble, not everybody, obviously. And you can have 100 people dead on the street, and they will walk past. You see? So, yeah.
Well, I think that intimate, having had deep suffering, that intimate experiential understanding of suffering, then it's true. So going back to the first things Lord Buddha taught, the truth of suffering, the truth that this life is suffering. Now that alone can be a statement that could totally turn people off, right? What a downer. It's not true, because much of the time, much of the world is trying to hide from that truth, right? Let's avoid it. Let's say it's happened to other people and never to me, right? So it makes absolute sense that having some awareness of and experience of suffering, we see the truth of suffering, right? Not in the profound way. I'm not saying, realizing that in the same sense as Lord Buddha, but a taste of that, right? So he taught the truth of suffering. And then he taught there's a cessation. There's something we can do about it. And then he taught the path. So that's what we're doing here. Like, okay, if he only taught the first thing, that there's suffering, even then I would say, well, it was the truth. It's the truth. And when you hear it and it resonates because it is the truth. You said earlier, everything else seems like a lie. And I think it's delusion, right? Which is a form of lie, not recognizing the truth of our situation. But then not being discouraged because there is this idea that there is something that we can do about it. It's not just that this samsara is suffering, but we don't have to stay here, right? And as we develop more conviction in that, taking bodhisattva vows, and if this is stuff that some of you, and Sergio, forgive me, I don't know kind of where or who you are yet, and Danielle, I don't really know if any of this is familiar to you already, and I don't want to get super dogmatic I don't want to get dogmatic at all, but especially not in a real introductory course. But I think it's good to hear. let's say the truth, which is that we are, Buddhist teachings are about eliminating that suffering and not hiding from it, not pretending that it doesn't exist, not just acting nice and then having all kinds of weird things happening in our head and building up resentment. It's not, actually, when I did move to Land of Medicine Buddha, right after meeting the Dharma, I was really trying hard to practice. And one of the things I had to do is I had to start having boundaries, because I did a lot of saying yes and a lot of nice things that looked nice. They fed my ego, but they were really exchanges. Almost. And then how do I know it's an exchange? Well, because I gave it and then I resented. I didn't get enough thanks, or I didn't get enough credit, or so too much about exposing my own mental afflictions. But so I became a Buddhist practitioner, and it looked like initially, in some ways, I didn't look as nice. I suddenly had some boundaries, but then my capacity started to change. I was like, I will do what I can do happily, because I want to be able to sustain it. I want to be able to continue and grow, and I don't want to give up and get discouraged. Daniela, do you want to say something? You're on mute.
Oh, my partner just came in the door, and I was just reminding him that I'm on here.
No worries. I just want to.
I do have. I know it was scheduled till 8:30, so I am expecting a phone call at 8:30. So I might take myself off camera or something at that.
No worries. I want to be conscious of everyone's time. So what I want to do is, and forgive, I think hopefully it was a worthwhile discussion. But I want to do one more meditation practice. But I also, we'll do the meditation practice. We'll do the dedication and wrap up the class. But then I'm also happy to stay on, because we did touch heavy stuff, and maybe people don't want to just go. And that's okay. So I can stay with anybody who wants to stay, but let's do the next exercise, if that's okay. So this is going to be a meditation on mind like sky. So very similar to the bare awareness meditation. So now we're trying to connect with and just relate to that nature, that spacious, clear, unobstructed nature of sky. And then, imagining like clouds, they're not the sky. They're things that come and then they dissipate, but they're not the sky. And try to connect with your mind in that way, not judging. And without being scattered, just being spacious and blissful. And now just imagine that along your spine is a shining blue tube, like the width of maybe your little finger or a straw. And it starts about 4 fingers down from your navel, and it runs up in front of your spine, up, and like an umbrella bends at your head. And then right at that place between your brows, it ends. And then on the right side, there is a red tube that runs right alongside the blue one. And then a white tube on your left. And they say that the right side is where all of the anger and aversion, those thoughts are riding like the most subtle breath riding along that channel. And then our attachment, selfishness is running along that white side on the left. And so if you take your index finger and let's plug the left side, left nostril, and breathe in, and then let that airflow come up and down that right channel. And then out on the left, clearing it. And then up again. And we'll do 3 times actually. Let's do on each side. Imagine all of the negativity coming out with each exhale. With each inhale, breathing in light and blessings. And you can imagine the exhale being like black smoke. Let's do that 3 times. Inhale. Exhale, clearing that channel. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Now doing the same thing, moving your finger to your right and then breathing in light. Exhaling negativity and black smoke. Breathing in light. Exhaling all negative afflictions. Again. And now imagine through both your nostrils, you're breathing in that middle blue channel. Breathing in white light, and then exhaling, imagine that coming out through that place in your forehead, between your brows. And let's do that 3 times. Breathing in light and positivity. Breathing out negativity. Breathing in light. Breathing out black smoke. Breathing in light. Breathing out obscuration. So forgive me, I launched into that really quickly because I wanted to give you a taste of that exercise, and we're coming up on time, so I'm really sorry. I would have ideally wanted to discuss it first and then do the exercise. It may not be crystal clear, but everyone has the handout, so there's different ways of doing the 9-round breathing. I did a hybrid thing, which I don't know if that was helpful or not, but wanted to give you a taste of both of those kind of versions. And then we did essentially Mind Like Sky is very similar to Bare Awareness. And then there is another practice, Mind Like the Ocean, Vast Like the Ocean, right? So the waves come and go, the fish are swimming through, but the ocean is not the waves and it's not the fish, right? And then we can quell some of that turbulence. So during the next week, I would invite everyone to try all of these practices. The 9-round breathing, again, we really sort of rushed through that, but we'll revisit that again next week. It's more of a concentration, sort of like counting your breath. Your mind is really focused, but then you've added this element of not just your breath, but making that association, breath and mind. And we talked about it last week, how they're very closely connected, right? And this particular exercise comes from a tantric tradition, but there's a long history in this lineage. You know, Lama Yeshe taught it and thought it would be helpful. So it's something that we share as a tool, you know, broadly with everyone. And you know, when I say tantra, it's just inner body practices. So people who've done yoga, you're already maybe somewhat familiar with these things. So forgive the rush, and read the material. So because I may have not just given a good description of where as I'm rushing through. So forgive me that. And I want to let everyone go. And I know you've got a call, Daniela, but I'd like, you know, let's dedicate. And next week, I'd love us to kind of share a dedication, personal dedication. But for now, you know, what we tried to do during this time is something good. It's something good in the world. And we all had, you know, both normal, nice motivations. And then I think we all also have our own highest motivations. And so let's just dedicate that the time that we spent be worthwhile and help to achieve those goals, the small goals and the higher, loftier ones. And may we have the courage to take the responsibility to help. And may all those things ripen, and may we continue to encounter teachers and teachings, the wisdom to help us achieve these goals. And may all of those beings who are trying to help us, may we be receptive to that help. So with that, yes, take care, Danielle. I hope you come back next week. So
Thank you, Bonnie. It was great.